Hello, everyone, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Math Made Easy with Terry 10 minutes. Okay, in the previous videos, I've talked about processing numbers. I've talked about the basics of function and how to represent them pictorially. I've also talked about tests, okay, how to know the vertical line test, how to know if a particular equation is a function. Today, I'm going to talk about the types of function, and there are several types. There are a lot, but I'm going to just focus on 7. The reason why I'm picking this 7 is because when I get into domain, range, and stuff like that, and polynomial division and stuff like that, these ones are gonna play around very well, especially when I talk about modulus and absolute values. Okay, so I'm gonna select 7 functions that are gonna be useful in the series. And please, well, you can go back home. You can practice with a lot of functions and try to know more than what we have here. So the first one I have here is what we call the identity function. Identity function. All right. So the identity functions, these are functions that return the input in a particular argument unchanged. So basically, if remember we talked about in processing numbers, I said the x coming, it goes through the function and brings out the y. Does that make sense? So that means in this identity function, the x will go through the function and also the output is going to be equal to the x. So that means if you draw the graph for this kind of functions, it's going to look something like this. So that means if, for instance, the x is 1, the y will still going to be what? 1. So if, for instance, the x is 2, the y is going to be what? 2. This is what we call an identity function. So that means the function of a particular variable, so if the function of a particular variable A is equal to B, B must be equal to what? A. Is that making sense? This is what we call an identity function. So basically, it's a function that returns the input in a particular argument or a particular manipulation or equation or change. The next one I want to talk about is what we call the constant function. All right. I call it the constant function. All right. So this constant function, these are functions that the output is always the same regardless of the input. Does that make sense? So the output is going to be the same. That means the value for the y is going to be the same regardless of the value for the x. So for instance, if you want to look at some of those functions like that, so let's say we have this, for instance. So the y is equal to 3. Now you can see, even if the x is equal to 1, the y is equal to 3. Even if the x is equal to 2, the y is still equal to 3. Even if the x is equal to 3, the y is equal to 3. Even if the x is equal to 4, the y is equal to 3. So this is what we call a constant function. Here, a function is, or a constant function is a function whose output is the same for every input, regardless of what type of input is that. Okay? All right. So for instance, if I'm writing this so that the function of a particular, let's say it's A, was equal to 3, regardless of what the B is. Is that okay? So that is it for that. That we'll call a constant function. Next one I'm going to talk about is modulus. Okay, a modulus function. I'm going to have, I think down the line in this series, we're going to talk about modulus function and absolute values. Please make sure you stay till the end, because in order for you to understand modulus and absolute values, it's important you try to understand this function. But modulus is very simple. It means that it's a function we give an absolute value. So that means this function is an absolute value, meaning that for every all the values you're going to get, all the outputs always going to be positive. Okay, I don't know bore you. I'm going to have a video section on that, but means that all the values are going to be positive regardless. So that means if you have this, so this is a classical modulus graph. Okay, so that means the function of A is, that will give you B is what? The absolute value of A. Is that making sense? So what we are saying here is that A is always going to be, the function of A is always going to be positive. So the graph is always on the positive side of the x-axis. Is that okay? It's always on the positive side, unless if there's a transformation. I'll talk about that later. I don't want to confuse you, but this is what we call a modulus function, and it looks like this. quick recap. We have an identity function. An identity function is a function that returns the x input unchanged as the y output. Does that make sense? So if the x is 1, the y is 1. If the x is 2, the y is 2. Now a constant function, this is a function that for regardless of the input, okay, now you see the input, regardless of the input, the output is going to remain the same. Can you see? So regardless of the input, the output is going to remain the same. Now a modulus function is an absolute value. So that means it's a function that gives an absolute value of the number, okay? I'll talk about this later. Another one again I have in mind is the polynomial function. The polynomial function. We're going to talk about this polynomial function, especially when we get to partial fractions and when we talk about polynomial division. So that's why I'm trying to introduce it here. So basically, a polynomial function involves any non-negative integer power of a variable in an equation. So any non-negative. So and it could be maybe you have something like x raised to the power of 3 plus 2x squared plus x plus 1, or you can have x raised to the power of 5 plus 4x4 plus x3 plus 2, or x raised to the power of 20 plus 10x5, stuff like that. So these are polynomial functions. So that means you can see the integers are non-negative, okay? Please, something like x minus 3 is not a polynomial function, okay? Minus 2, you understand? It's not a polynomial function. It has to have a non-negative integer. And the polynomial functions are broken into other 3 types. So that will lead me to number 5 now. So when the polynomial function degree is 2, it's called quadratic. That will lead me to number 5 now, okay? So we have the quadratic function. Okay? So this is a form of a polynomial function, but in this case, the degree of 2 is the degree of x is raised to power what? 2. Can you see? That's a quadratic function. And depending on the coefficient of x squared, it can either be like this, it can also be a concave. I'm going to have a video on quadratic function, so I'm not going to bore you, but basically, a quadratic function is a polynomial function. So remember, I told you polynomial functions where their degrees are non-negative integers, right? But in this case now, the highest degree in a quadratic function is 2, okay? Now, but the next one is what we call the cubic function. I know some of you might have heard this before. So a cubic function is the same thing or similar. Here, it's a polynomial function, but the degree is 3. Is that making sense? So you're going to have something like, it's going to be ax cubed plus bx squared plus cx plus d. Is that making sense? So that is a cubic function. Now, a quadratic function is where the maximum here is 2. A cubic function is also a polynomial function where the maximum here is 3. And the last one I'm going to talk about is the rational function. So a rational function, I'm not going to talk so much about this, but because I'm going to have a section for it where we talk about things like the asymptote, and we talk about things like division. So basically, a rational function is usually when you have a particular polynomial divided by another polynomial. Is that making sense? So I'm going to have a video on this, okay? So I'm not going to confuse you. So you have something, usually it could look like, some of the graphs could look like this, could look like this. Another one could look like something like this, okay? Something like that. So I don't want to complicate issues here. I just want to just introduce the concept. Then we'll now go straight and pick each of them and talk about them, all right? So what have I said in this few minutes here? We have 7 types I talked about. We have the identity functions. So with the identity function, these are functions that the inputs are exactly the same thing as the output. So basically the input is equal to the output. We have the constant function. So regardless of the input, you have the same output. And we have the modulus function as well. Here, where I said in the modulus function, the function gives you the absolute values. Okay, I'm going to have a video on that. I also have polynomial functions that can be broken down into different types. You have the quadratic, you have the cubic function, and you also finally you have the rational function. Okay, good. So I believe this, I think 6 videos now we've had has laid the foundation for the next topic we're going into now. We're going to talk about domain and range, okay? Domain and range. So at this point now, I believe you know how to process numbers. I believe you know how to how functions are being done pictorially. I believe you know the basics of functions. I believe you know how to find the types of functions, as well as to know if a particular equation is a function or not, using the vertical line test. Good. So now we're gonna go. I'll see you in the next video. In the next video, we're gonna talk about domain and range, and how do we go about it, and how do you determine the domain and range for a particular function or equation. All right. Thank you very much. I'm gonna see you soon.